people just feel like, oh, let me just copy this. This looks pretty. This is aesthetic. This is what I like and I'm drawn to. And I've done that before too. Like, oh, this seems to be going well. If I call it copying, what it really does is you're borrowing someone else's brand. You can't copy someone else's voice or their nervous system, their way of being. I'm a big believer that authentic branding has to come to you from your own lived experience.
Welcome back to the Firestarter Podcast. I am your host, Willa Kammerer, and today we're going to be talking about how to create a magnetic personal brand that actually feels authentic. And we're joined by Rubina Chadha, who is a personal branding, mindfulness, and visibility coach, and she's also the founder of Inner Design. She supports people in reconnecting with their presence, their purpose, and their creative energy so that their outward work feels natural and aligned. Welcome, Rubina. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thanks, Willa. I'm so happy to be here.
I love this. So I'd love to walk back to the beginning, how it's such interesting work that you do. And I imagine that it's been, a very interesting path that's led you here. So how did you get into doing what you do today?
It's been quite a journey, So I started as a designer. I was thinking of myself as a commercial artist first. And I kind of went like full circle. I went into the education realm and then started teaching and then kind of came back and started to merge this. And for me, it really came in with mindfulness tools because that's where I really started to understand what design was, like design as thinking, and I think sometimes we misunderstand what design thinking is. And designers think we're here looking at something aesthetically or bringing something into form. And I think that the way that I lead with branding is that it becomes really, it's self-branding, right? So I think that a lot of people think that branding is how they appear online or what they say, their bio, their niche, their strategy. And I think that people really actually respond to what they feel when you show up. And so presence, I always say, lands before your words or messaging does, right?
I love that. And I think that's kind of one of the areas where we're really aligned. We connected, I think it was first on Instagram, was it? And then we realized we had all these, kind of like mutual connections and kind of shared networks. And it was kind of like fast friends, just like this feeling of like, oh, like I think we, think about branding and presence and, building authority and brands, in kind of similar ways. I think I'd love to hear your perspective. I think, when we hear the word branding and building a personal brand, oftentimes, kind of the conventional way of thinking of it is thinking of kind of like outside in, like you're overlaying something, on top of someone to build this brand. But, I would love to kind of hear your perspective on, what building an authentic personal brand and branding in general means to you.
One thing I bring into branding that's often missing is the nervous system piece. So, for example, if someone's anxious, burned out, or they're just bracing for judgment, their voice will tighten, their content feels forced, and that confidence is not something that you can just push into. It shows up when the body feels safe enough to be seen. And we all have things that, bump us around in life. And it's about finding that alignment that sometimes looks more like consistency without effort. What you actually innately show up as is your brand. And so translating and transferring that into business speak is often hard for people because we are so performance driven and we're not thinking about just being there in presence. We think about outcome first and not process, right? And so it's that part, it's that piece. Really, I would say, like, without effort, who are you? How do you show up? What's important to you? Branding, going through the branding journey of creating an identity for someone, even if it's just for themselves, not in a business context, is starting in that point of like, which direction is important to me and is my life on a trajectory for, and really just kind of talking about that. And I think a huge thing is decisions, right? I always say life is made of all the small choices we make and bigger decisions. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is my life, right? You can kind of graph it. Like, I made these decisions and these things happened.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so interesting because I think it's almost like a permission piece. It's a noisy space online out there. And part of the nature of building a brand online is you kind of have to like do it in public. One of my
Yeah.
core values is really this idea of practicing in public. And I think, by the nature of building a brand online, you're kind of forced to do that. But I think amidst that, I'm curious your perspective, but I feel like people feel this pressure to like, oh, it seems like I should. There's a lot of shoulds. Like I should do this because this person seems like they're getting traction and being successful. So, kind of this pressure to kind of cobble together what seems like it's working for other people. And in the midst of that, kind of like losing their own center. So I love that you work closely with people to really kind of like almost give permission to be
Yes,
themselves.
yes. Exactly, exactly. I think what you're mentioning is like all of that pressure, it feels really heavy. And usually that's a sign that something is internally out of sync for us. We can just think of that in the bigger picture of our life. And so, same thing when we show up online, if it's just not, it's out of sync and it's heavy and it's pressured. I think a simple self check, I would say, just become aware after you share something. Ask yourself, do I feel more like myself or am I less like myself, right? I mean, we all go through that imposter syndrome and like stepping into big shoes that sometimes we're afraid to fill. That's different, but kind of like, am I really being in my authentic self? And did this come from truth or is it performance? Your body will always tell you if you really are aligned faster than the analytics will show, actually.
Absolutely. I'd love to, kind of digging in a little bit more to your own journey. Like, do you feel like, I think often, we come to our methodology, our perspectives on things through our own personal experience. Was there a time where you yourself kind of experienced the sense of kind of like pressure, performance, like not feeling aligned, and then, kind of came more into alignment, or, curious if you've had your own story there?
Oh, I've had plenty of practice out there. I definitely have had my share of practice of doing things and then being like, no, 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 this is not it. In different levels in my business and career life and path and my personal life. And then it comes to a point where I'm just like, okay, this is not borrowing like energetically, not really, I wouldn't say copying, but in some ways, we think, oh, these are the strategies. I have to follow that. It really doesn't work. And for me, I've found out how much it really robbed me of being myself, So I'll just say a big thing for me was running a business that was a family business. It was the pressure. It was the expectations, the demands, all of that stuff. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I've been told all my life. And then just coming to it and saying, you know what, this is just not me. I'm crumbling inside. Yeah, it looks great on paper. And that's the worst part is if something looks great on paper, you're just like, why mess with it? It's, I'm reaping rewards and everything seems great, or that quote unquote great that just doesn't feel. And so I think that um, it's, with social media, especially, and with design tools like Canva, people just feel like, oh, let me just copy this. This looks pretty. This is aesthetic. This is what I like and I'm drawn to. And I've done that before too. Like, oh, this seems to be going well. But what, if I call it copying, what it really does is you're borrowing someone else's brand. And in the long term, it doesn't actually do justice for you. It may not affect the other person. It really, in the long term, kind of hurts yourself because you can't copy someone else's voice or their nervous system, their way of being. So the moment you try to sound like somebody else, you'll find it more in your body. There's that tight and your message gets lost and the clarity is gone. And you can just be on that hamster wheel, just like, it seems to work for them. Why not me? Right. And so I really am a big believer that authentic branding has to come to you from your own lived experience. And sometimes that's harsh because we all have not had perfect lived experiences and we want it to look, bright and pretty out there with all the
Aesthetic.
filters, aesthetic, all the
Exactly.
filters,
Yeah.
right? I know we were doing those during the holiday time. I think you and I were doing all those little
Yeah, the chat
trending things.
GBT imagery.
Fun.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
great. It's like have fun with it, but it sounds like, the work you do is also helping people kind of like build what feels more sustainable, because it's you can keep up, the kind of like appearances and kind of delegating branding to someone else's, lived experience, aesthetics and things. But ultimately, that's a pretty exhausting path if you're constantly having to, kind of come up with the answers outside of yourself versus what's inside.
Exactly. And who doesn't want to live with ease and flow? We all are searching for that. And so getting that alignment is really like that first piece of it. And just saying, okay, this is where I am. This is who I am. I may not be so and so, but this brings me ease and flow. And it comes naturally. Eventually, you're just like, wow, this is who I am. And it's the success that you see, I'll say that way, that what you reap from it comes with more ease because it's natural and people want to see you for you. They want to come to you for what you're offering.
Yeah, we see it a lot in our work with clients at Firestarter, kind of this similar, they're coming and they have all these ideas, you've got Canva, you've got Instagram, Facebook, and then you layer ChatGPT and, all the ideas coming from there. And, it's again, this idea of, trying to do the right things and just not almost having that permission and confidence to be themselves, but that kind of like moment that the switch flips and, people kind of have that permission and start to build that confidence. It's just so transformative. And I think, as we said, it's just a much more, sustainable pathway.
Absolutely. And I don't feel against all those tools like Canva or ChatGPT. We need something to help us to be productive, to keep up, to kind of let things come off of our plate, especially people who are like solopreneurs. They're doing it all. You kind of need to delegate it so all of your energy is not just, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. Those tools are there. They're great. They help us to get the things done. But the initial like design as thinking again, it's not about that look of it. That look can be, you can capture that from those apps. You can say, yes, make it look this way. Great. But it's about learning how to think in systems. So the ability to hold a problem without rushing to fix it, to generate the ideas and lead to, okay, better questions and stay open enough, long enough for something to emerge. That's really that problem solving piece where I think we're trying to shortcut that. ChatGPT is not going to solve your problems. It's going to help you to kind of punch out the thing that you need once you feel and you realize this is the problem. Help me to get to that, end goal. That's great. We all need those things. And I think it's the same process that people really need when they're clarifying their brand. Is thinking of it more as a direction, right? So just going back to that same thing, like I said, the alignment and then kind of zoning in and saying, okay, this way, and that's the way we're going to march and get all the tools to help you to do it. That's great.
I think also, what we see a lot is I think a lot of people, again, because of the noise out there and, looking at all these models who seem like they're so successful in these areas, a lot of people don't really give themselves the credit that they deserve. They've built so much, have so much kind of rich, lived personal and professional experience. And part of, I think, this work is just reflecting the mirror back and saying like, you are enough and you bring so much to the table and let's bring that out. Right. And like, let that be magnetic because it is, but we hide behind, these. So I think part of it's just holding up that mirror. And I think you do that so well.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. You said it so well. It's like that is about being that clearer. And, it's not being louder or in a different voice. It's just getting that clarity, the visibility, the acknowledgement, and accepting that attention.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the visibility piece. How do you find that people, struggle with kind of this idea of being seen kind of more intentionally, kind of putting themselves out there? And if so, how do you help people work through that?
Absolutely. I even, fall in that category every so often. I'm like, it's a little scary. Is this okay? And instead of tiptoeing, I just kind of go back into that of like, okay, let me feel what's right for me. Who am I? Get a self check. And, I think that visibility is about recognition, and the recognition isn't from out there from someone else or some other place. It's really that recognition of yourself to yourself. And that was a big game changer for me, was just like, okay, I know me. I know what I'm saying. I know what I'm about. And then that just steps into a whole different skin of yourself. You're just like, oh my gosh, I know who I am and what I'm about. So now I can go and do it. Now I can open my mouth and voice it out. Whereas sometimes hearing all these different conflicting messages and feeling like, oh, this person told me I'm this and that person saw me this way. And I've been stuck in that same loop and it's just spinning. And of course it was like that voice within me was trying to push through, and I just had to pause and say, all right, let me listen to what it's saying, that inner me, the wise me, and what it wants to live as. I mean, this is what it is, guys. This is not dress rehearsal, just open your closet, put on your clothes, walk out there and live your life, right? To become more magnetic, letting yourself be seen as who you really are.
Absolutely. The universe does have a way of kind of sending those. I think when we step into that, having been in places of non-alignment and stepping into alignment, the universe has its way of kind of telling you like, all right, you're on the right path. Like things just kind of have a way of falling into place and kind of sending you those signals, those, kind of like serendipitous moments, connections, things like that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's true. And I would say that just between you and I just felt like Firestarter were something that I was just so drawn to. And I thought, oh, there's something here. And the more I kind of went deeper and deeper, and I said, oh my gosh, Willa and I, we're like on parallel tracks in so many ways. And yes, the universe brings us to us. Sometimes we think we're the one, only one. And yes, you are unique and individual, each one of you listening to this. But also we are in this collaboration, community, communal, society. And there are more than just you when you're facing something alone. There are more people that are aligned, that are in similar paths, trajectories. And sometimes just stepping into yourself brings all those people just like, hey, I'm so glad you spoke up because I was feeling that same thing. Or I also had those experiences. And so it's beautiful. And I do feel it's serendipitous and it's magical.
Yeah, I'm so glad you named that. And that's part of why I love, this forum of the podcast, also just kind of opening up the space for these conversations, these connections, and you never know, what might spark for someone, because sometimes that's all we need. It's just like this little spark and this little kind of like moment of like, oh, I feel a little bit more understood. And yes, I'm so glad, like the universe has connected us in special ways. I think first on Instagram, and then, we realized, we're both part of this TV series, Women in Power with Inside Success. We're actually going to be meeting next month in Miami, which is super exciting, meeting in person.
Yes.
And I was in LA last week. We almost met, we had a misconnection, but these are, we're kind of like, until a couple months ago when we connected, on Instagram, we were just kind of like individually following these kind of like intersecting paths, and we never would have known it until we connected the dots. And now we see like all these intersection points. And I think, if you think of, all these, it can feel lonely building a brand and business online. And I think for both of us, the work that we do, with clients is really about supporting, making you out there, feel like you have support and connected, and you don't have to figure this all out alone, and kind of opening the door to that support. We're all in community. We're all figuring this out together. And, no one has all the answers. Every single person who you see, quote, at the top is constantly on a journey, constantly evolving. So
Yes, exactly. I was going to say that same thing. We're all on a path, and life is all about those ups and downs. When you see like the hospital monitor and you see that heartbeat, and it's up and down and up and down, that's life. And as soon as it's flat, we want that plateau. But as soon as it's flatlining, we're like, no, this is no longer life. And so if you're up and down, be grateful, because that's just the biggest sign that you are alive. We all have gone through it at different times. And I think it's wonderful to be in a community with you as well, with other women, each one of us reaching, into another person's life, lifting them up, helping them up. I've been there. I've gotten through this. Let me help you. And it's really such a service. I think that, thinking about branding and all of that stuff and sales and all these things out there sometimes becomes really shallow and hard. But when we really stop and realize what we're doing is we're turning our life into an opportunity to serve one another and bring each other on the path and rise. And next month we'll be on the red carpet together, you and I. I'm looking forward to that.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited to continue this conversation in person. It's been such a, wonderful preamble and, first conversation. I'm sure we'll have many more to come. Thank you for sharing everything that you have, Rubina. How can our listeners find you and learn more about your incredible work?
Absolutely. You can find me on my website, theinnerdesign.com, and I'm active on social media. Instagram is at @theofficialrubina. LinkedIn, also Rubina Chadha. You can find me everywhere. I don't use bots. I always respond. So, I love to tell listeners that, hey, if you want to reach out and chat, I'm happy. I'm open to and willing to, you won't get those auto responses or anything like that. It'll be me. And so I'd love to connect. Theinnerdesign.com will be getting its own revamp using Firestarter funnels and things like that. So I'm really excited about that as well and have more offers to provide for everyone.
Amazing. Well, we love having you part of the Firestarter community as well. You are emblematic of a Firestarter and, all of the information, Rubina, ways to connect with her and learn more about her work, you can find in the show notes at thefIrestarterPodcast.com. We'll also link there to more about Firestarter's work and our platform, Firestarter Funnels, which Rubina mentioned and is part of our community there, all-in-one business platform. Loved having this conversation, having you part of the show. If you enjoyed this conversation, please check out the Firestarter Podcast on my YouTube channel. That's Willa Kammerer, Kammerer. And it's so helpful if you go and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Leave a review if you can. That really helps listeners like you find more conversations like this. So thank you so much for tuning in and really looking forward to our next time on the Firestarter Podcast. Thanks so much.